Now to wait 30 turns while I research masonry? Wait, what's that sound?
Nuclear launch detected.
何？お前はもう死んでいる。
Civilization is an institution in video gaming. From the first game that came out in 1991 to the latest, Civ 6, that came out in 2016, Sid Meier's name has been indelibly inked into the annals of video game history, and the impact that his game and its conventions have had on the strategy genre of gaming. At its heart, all of the Civilization games are 4X games. Explore, expand, exploit, and of course, exterminate. That's the heart of the kind of experience a game like Civilization offers you. Although there has been a great deal of difference in the way the games have been presented, a tweak to the civics policy here, a shift in city management there is one thing that has remained consistent: the tech tree, and that is the topic of today's video. Now let's take a look at this map of the world. Now I want you to point out which people in which parts of the world were able to actually make paper. If you guessed China, well done. The Chinese, specifically the Han Dynasty, were the first documented example of papermaking in the world. This happened around 25 to 220 AD, and it took until the 8th century for papermaking to spread into the Middle East, and then till about the 11th century until it actually reached Europe. So the question I want to ask is, would a civilization that has developed papermaking be more or less advanced than one without? What about the wheel? In Civ 6, the wheel is a foundational technology. You can learn it in the ancient era, the earliest period of history for all civilizations. In fact, you need to research it before you can research the more useful engineering technology which unlocks the heavy chariot, a powerful unit in early battles. And yet, in the real world, there are several sophisticated civilizations that did not make use of the wheel as a logistical or transportation tool. Examples include the Mesoamerican Inca, who were able to build massive structures of stone and a complex society, but all without the widespread use of the wheel. They certainly knew about wheels, and they used them for toys, but the local conditions of their civilization made the use of the wheel more inefficient in comparison to other methods of transport. I refer you to this great video by Learnerbox about African societies and the wheel. Check out the description for more. So if you're astute, I think you can probably infer what point I'm getting at here. In Civilization, the technological development of your civilization is based around the idea of the tech tree. You have to research technologies that are lower down or earlier in the tech tree to unlock those that go later on. Of course, that makes sense. What this ignores is that in reality, technologies don't really develop in a vacuum. In Civilization, you can very easily rank civilizations by the amount of technology that they have unlocked. In fact, one of the ways that you can win a game of Civ is to achieve a science victory. This usually involves reaching the end of the tech tree and unlocking all of the technologies, and by nature being the first to do so. The reasons for why technologies like the wheel or papermaking spread to some civilizations but not others largely has to do with the conditions of that civilization. If your civilization doesn't have access to the kinds of animals that make wheel transport preferable to manpower, or perhaps the terrain you live in is too rocky or uneven to make wheels viable, or maybe even your society doesn't really have a need to move surplus goods via transportation, then it doesn't really make sense to spend your time investing in wheels, does it? The way we think about technology and society is very similar to the way that the Civ games think about technology and society, namely as a series of gradually forward steps with progress only moving in one direction. Now, of course, technology improves over time. This is an indisputable fact. People who start making boats in the 1st century will invariably end up making boats of more sophisticated and more advanced methods in the future. But ascribing value to a civilization because of the technology that it had developed is an issue, because different civilizations will have different contexts, and what works for one civilization might not work for all of them. In the case of the Civ games, all civilizations must by design follow the same tech tree. To the credit of the series as a whole, it has done a lot to include the contributions of different people from across history, and it does reflect some diversity in things like unique units and buildings for different civilizations. But regardless of these slight deviations, the underlying assumption about what society looks like remains the same. In his book, The End of History and the Last Man, Francis Fukuyama argued that social and political evolution had sort of reached a zenith. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was a feeling in the world that there were no alternatives to the system of bourgeoisie liberal democracy that had been best exemplified by the United States of America. There are perhaps criticisms to make of Fukuyama's work, a topic best saved for a later video, but the key point here is that he argued that there was an evolution of the political and social order of humanity, and this evolution culminated in the Western style of liberal democracy. Nothing could exist beyond our Western style of liberal democracy, and attempts to do so would invariably end in failure. This was the end of history. You could hypothetically start as Menelik II with an Ethiopian civilization on a planet full of islands, but regardless of how such a civilization might actually progress, it would in the game, and of course if it survived, convert itself into some kind of political structure that we see now or have seen in the past, either communism under the Soviet Union, capitalism under the United States, or fascism as it was seen in Germany or Italy. There is no real evolution beyond that. Of course, in Civ 6, the game does present ideologies and political structures in a post-modern age, but it doesn't make any strong predictions about what these things would really look like, and certainly by the time your society has reached that stage of the game, you really are entering into the endgame. And so, there's no real exploration about what societies could look like in a hypothetical future beyond capitalism or communism as we knew it, or fascism as we saw it. Perhaps as important as the end of history is actually the beginning of history. The Civ games and their beginning of history is remarkably rigid. No matter who you choose, no matter what civilization you play as, your civilization must research the basic set of technologies, such as writing, animal husbandry, and so on, that the game provides you, and this locks you into a path that can only end in the manner defined by the game. There's no room, really, in the competitive nature of the game world, for a civilization to really and truly develop differently. Those that fall behind on the technological or social evolution that the game decides on fall into ruin, crushed by their competitors. You see, what's baked into this way of thinking is the assumption that all civilizations must invariably be locked into conflict with their neighbors, and that no stable equilibrium is possible. But I would like to question whether or not this is really true. Say, for example, indigenous Australian societies. Would those societies have really collapsed under their own weight had they not been invaded by colonial European powers? I have to wonder if they would simply have continued to develop as they were. The same is arguably true for many of the Native American societies. They were, to every extent, stable. Why would they have collapsed or been subject to the same pressures and influences that European societies were? Rather than have the freedom to develop their own civilizations along their own paths, their civilizational development was imposed upon by an external force, their colonizers. Now, it is important to clarify that I don't think any of this makes the Civ games bad games. They are games that reflect the society that they're in. And of course, everyone will have their favorite Civ game. Woe betide anyone who speaks ill of Civ 4 around me. The games have chosen their structure, and building a truly massive social simulation tends to make it a lot less accessible in the way that games like Hearts of Iron are. But it is nevertheless interesting to examine how games like Civilization tell us something about how we think about our own history in the real world. How we sometimes might fall into the trap of thinking one civilization is better than another because it developed a particular technology first, or worse, that it used that technology to conquer its neighbors. When we look back, what we are doing is projecting onto history a sense of order that did not exist at the time. Discovery and invention are chaotic, and oftentimes trivial. For example, gunpowder, for all of its destructiveness, was originally developed for medical purposes. We had no way of knowing what technological path gunpowder would follow, and what technological destruction it would eventually enable. Technological evolution is not a tree, it's a disorganized, tangled web. Therefore, no civilization is better than any other on this basis. All civilizations attempt to do what they can with what they have. Progress and missteps are part of the process, but ultimately the civilizations that stand the test of time are the ones that are best suited to their environments, and there are, of course, many environments where civilizations have thrived. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go get revenge on Gandhi. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. I have a couple of announcements. Firstly, I have to apologize for not releasing a video sooner. A medical condition is making video production a little bit difficult, but I am hoping to get better soon. Secondly, the next episode of Bytemarks is in production. It and a couple of other videos are in the production pipeline, and I hope they'll be out relatively soon. Thirdly, I am thinking of doing a 100 subscribers special, so if you have any questions that you'd like me to ask, please leave them in the comments below, and I will maybe put them into a video answering them. Thank you everyone for 100 subscribers. I hope that we can continue to grow. Take care and be safe.